In the winter of 1944, the snow fell thick and silent over the small town of Heiderscheid in Luxembourg. For a young American infantryman standing guard, the freezing air turned his breath to mist. It was a night that didn't feel special, but it would become one he'd remember for the rest of his life. This was the Battle of the Bulge, a desperate, surprise German offensive through the dense Ardennes forest. For the soldiers on the ground, every village, every crossroads, every shadow suddenly mattered. For days, the air had been filled with tension. Rumors flew like sparks in the wind: German infiltrators wearing American uniforms, captured jeeps used for sabotage, sudden attacks that could erupt from the quiet woods at any moment. In that deep, frozen silence, the sound of any engine in the dark could mean death. And then, he heard it. A low, steady rumble, getting closer. A truck, approaching through the night. Its headlights were faint, hazy glows filtering through the falling snow as it rolled toward the town. For a brief, hopeful second, he thought it might be friendly. Another supply run, maybe, or a unit shifting positions in the dark. But as it drew nearer, a cold certainty settled in his stomach. The silhouette was wrong. The shape, the sound of the engine, everything screamed that something was off. It was a German truck. It was moving slowly, deliberately, as if it belonged there, trying to slip right into their lines under the cover of the storm. His heart hammered against his ribs. He was one of the first to see it, one of the first to understand the threat. Just then, he saw movement behind the enemy vehicle. A U.S. tank, one of their own, rumbled into position, its massive form blocking the street. The German truck was now trapped inside Heiderscheid. There was no time for a meeting, no time to get orders. The young soldier knew this was his moment. He stepped out from his cover, just far enough to get a clear view of the truck's cab. He raised his rifle, the cold steel of familiar weight in his hands, and aimed squarely at the windshield. For a fraction of a second, he saw the vague, human-shaped outlines of the figures inside. Then he pulled the trigger. The shot cracked through the frozen air like a whip. The glass of the windshield shattered instantly. The truck lurched, its momentum carrying it forward, rolling past him down the street. It went another half-block, toward the center of the town square, before it finally ground to a halt. An eerie silence fell over the square. The truck just sat there, its engine coughing, its headlights cutting two bright paths through the snow. And then, all at once, the world exploded into chaos. The entire American position opened up. Rifles, machine guns, and the heavy cannon of the supporting tank all poured a storm of fire into the vehicle. The night lit up with a furious, man-made lightning. Muzzle flashes illuminated walls and windows in strobing bursts. Tracers carved brilliant, deadly lines through the darkness, turning the truck into a maelstrom of sparks and splintering metal. Within seconds, it was over. The German truck, which they later discovered was packed with enemy soldiers ready for a surprise assault, was shredded and silent. The attack was utterly destroyed before it had even begun. Looking back, the soldier remembered how simple it might have seemed from the outside: see the enemy, shoot, win the fight. But in his own mind, time had warped. In that single, critical moment when he took aim, his entire world had narrowed to the sights of his rifle and the faint, ghostly shadows behind the glass. As the truck rolled away and the first friendly shots erupted, every heartbeat felt stretched, every sound amplified. It was only when the firing stopped that the world crashed back into its normal rhythm. The air in the square was thick with the smell of exhaust, cordite, and burning wood. Fresh snowflakes began to fall on the twisted metal and the still bodies, softening the harsh edges of the scene, but not the memory. But the night was far from over. The danger didn't disappear with the destruction of that one truck. The Battle of the Bulge was still raging all around them. The front lines were a fluid, confusing, and lethal mess. Later that night, the soldier found himself moving along the dark edges of Heiderscheid, slipping between buildings and down narrow, snow-covered streets. The town, which by daylight was just a simple cluster of houses and farms, had transformed into a terrifying maze of shadows. He couldn't see more than a few feet ahead. Every darkened doorway, every narrow alley felt like a potential ambush, a place that could hide someone with a gun. That's when he heard them, German voices. They were close. The words were foreign, but the tones were unmistakable, orders being given. Questions being asked, the quick, hushed exchanges of men who were also trying to navigate the same frozen, bewildering night. They weren't distant. They were near. Maybe just on the next street over. Maybe just behind the row of houses he was creeping past. For a heart-stopping moment, he wasn't sure if he had slipped behind enemy lines, or if they had slipped behind his. The feeling was pure terror. Once again, time seemed to slow to a crawl. He pressed himself into the deepest shadows he could find. His heart racing, trying to control his breathing, trying to keep his boots from crunching too loudly in the snow. He knew that firing blindly into the dark would be a fatal mistake, it would give away his position instantly. But he also knew that being caught alone, just a few dozen yards from his unit, could mean disappearing forever, another soldier lost without a trace. The Ardennes did that to men, it turned familiar ground into a place where friend and foe could be separated by nothing more than a single wall. Never seeing each other. Carefully, feeling his way more by memory than by sight, he began to move back toward his own lines. Every single step was a gamble. The German voices would fade, then suddenly seem closer again, carried by the strange acoustics of the cold air and the narrow streets. He couldn't pinpoint exactly where they were, he only knew they were too close for comfort. That feeling, of walking right next to an unseen enemy, separated only by darkness and fear, made every second stretch into an eternity. Finally, through the gloom, he saw shapes that meant safety, the familiar outlines of American vehicles, the dark forms of men speaking English in hushed, urgent tones. When he slipped back into his unit's perimeter, the relief was immense, but it was incomplete. The adrenaline continued to course through his veins. The town and the vast, dark forest beyond still hid countless threats that could materialize at any moment. In the Ardennes, during that brutal winter, no one ever truly relaxed. You just tried to survive until the next dawn. Years after the war, the old soldier would tell the story of Heiderscheid. He'd talk about the German truck driving straight into their arms, the single shot through the windshield, the sudden eruption of gunfire, and those long, frozen minutes he spent moving through the dark with enemy voices as his only companions. It wasn't a tale of grand strategy or famous generals. It was a memory of one night on the front line, where life and death hinged on the split-second decision of a single man who saw headlights cutting through the snow. His story, like countless others from the Battle of the Bulge, reminds us what that war was truly like from the ground: confusing, terrifying, and intensely, profoundly human. Thank you for watching. If you found this story moving, please consider subscribing for more personal histories from those who were there.